Well, gracious greetings, St. Stephen family and guests. Welcome to another edition of Living Water for a Thirsty Thursday. Yeah, we're continuing our discussion about boom. Yeah, when life explodes all around us. Last week, we talked about disturbances or disruptions that lead hopefully to reflection that eventually gets us to a place of correction in areas of our lives. Prayerfully, your takeaways today will be that of dealing with disruption a little bit more in the area of normally it would be disapproved to have a disruption. They are disturbing when we have a disruption, and they are disorienting when we have a disruption. The scripture that I want to read comes from Luke, the 22nd chapter, starting at the 47th verse. And it says, "And while he yet spake, behold, a multitude, and he that was called Judas, one of the 12, went before them, and drew near unto Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus said unto him, Judas, betrayest thou the Son of Man with a kiss? When they which were about him saw what would follow, they said unto him, Lord, shall we smite with the sword? And one of them smote the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. And Jesus answered and said, Suffer ye thus far. And he touched his ear and healed him." Well, you know this text if you've been in the church a couple days. This is the Garden of Gethsemane, and it's Jesus Christ who is about to lay down his life, surrender his life, if you would, to the high priest, chief priest, all those to cast judgment on him. And we know one of the 12, who is Judas, is the one basically that sold him out. And Judas told the officials that he would signify who Jesus is with a kiss once they arrived. And that's exactly what Judas was doing to Jesus. Simultaneously, you have Peter, who is this disciple that is with Jesus, who is there, and he notices what's going on. And we know he has a position that he wants to take. Lastly, we have Jesus, who is in the midst of that with Judas as well as Peter. And so why select this passage? Because it is the perfect collision of disruptions. There's a disruption right there that we start with as we look in other texts that still speak to this same story here. This person is Malchus, and he is a servant of the high priest. And all of a sudden, he's just trying to be a good servant. He's as innocent as you can be walking into this, just trying to do what his high priest asks him to do. And his disruption occurs. And all of a sudden, this man pulls out a knife and he cuts off his ear. Can you imagine the pain that Malchus is in and where he is? And he's like, oh my goodness, all I'm trying to do is come and, this isn't the Roman government. This isn't Roman soldiers. This is just a servant of a high priest that was coming to assist the high priest. And next thing he knows, someone's getting offensive on him. He's not postured or positioned or prepared to deal with it. And so, of course, it's a disruption for him. Is this something that he would approve? No, this would be disapproved if you ask Malchus, is he willing to have his ear cut off? Is it something that's disturbing? Absolutely, it's disturbing to have your ear bleeding and hurting in that moment. Is it disorienting? Yes, he's disoriented. He doesn't know now why he's there, or what he needs to do, or how he's going to recover from this moment. And then, of course, you have Peter, who is there with his Messiah that he's been learning and being groomed and moving forward in his ministry and all these things. And now all of a sudden it seems like it's coming to a close and they're ready to arrest the person that's been giving him guidance for the last 3 years. Is that a disturbance? Is that a disruption? Absolutely. Is it something that he would approve of, to have Jesus taken away? Absolutely not. Is it something that is disturbing? Yes, it's disturbing. Is it disorienting? Yes, and probably the reason why he pulled out his knife and went on the offensive. And most theologians say that he was actually really probably trying to cut his head off or really kill him, but he missed and just struck the ear and cut the ear off. And then lastly, obviously, we have Jesus Christ, who is also in the midst of this disturbance. He's just trying to be obedient to the Father, follow through on the commitment to surrender his life. And in the midst of him trying to surrender his life, one of his own boys decides to pull out a knife. Is that something he would approve of? Absolutely not. We already know from the text that is not the case. Is it something that's disturbing? Yes, because he's been teaching and he's been preaching and he's been explaining and saying this should come to pass. And then, of course, is it disorienting? Well, maybe not so much for Jesus Christ himself as God, but as man, yeah, it'd be a little bit perplexing knowing what you need to do. And so we have this text teaching us about all of those things that lets us know that even in these disruptions, even though we disapprove, even though these things aren't things that we like, we still have to know that God has a plan in the midst of it. It can be disturbing, it can be disorienting, but God takes those things to get our attention. For sure, now we know God had Peter's attention. For sure, now we know God has Malchus' attention. For sure, now we know Jesus has laser focus on what he's supposed to do, so much to the point where he brings in the healing. And that is exactly what happens with Malchus. He had to go through the disturbance. Yeah, he had to go through being uncomfortable. He had to go through that pain. He had to go through the agony. Yeah, we may have to go through issues with our finances. We may have to go through issues with our body and its health. We may have to go through issues with our children. We may have to go through issues with our employer or our employees. We may have to go through issues with our neighbor on the block or on the street. We may have to go through issues with people in the church. But just know that the disturbance, remember, we said that disruption is supposed to move us to reflection. It's supposed to move us hopefully to some correction, even though we disapprove, and even though it's something that's disturbing, and even though it's something that is disorienting, knowing that God is working through whatever we are going through. And when it's time to put the hand up to bring about the healing, God will do just that. And that's the tough part, but that's the reality. I want to close it out here with the 53rd verse of the same chapter, chapter 22. Listen at what Jesus says. Jesus now talking to the high priest. Jesus now talking to all those that came to arrest him. He says, "When I was daily with you in the temple, you stretched forth no hands against me. But this is your honor and the power of darkness." What is being said right there? Well, if you read through this and you exegete this verse, you know, all Jesus is simply saying is every day for the last 3 years, I've been here and I've been teaching and I've been preaching and I've been healing and I've been casting out demons. I've been doing all those things, and never did you ever try to grab hold of me to arrest me back then when you were receiving all the blessings. But here you come out now with knives and pitchforks and everything else to arrest me with hostility. He says, but I want you to know it's not you. I know God has a perfect plan for this disturbance in my life. I know God has a perfect plan for this hostility that's coming towards me. I know God has a plan for this discomfort that's coming. I know God has a plan for the explosion that goes boom. Prayerfully, this helps you a little bit more to deal with that one piece, the disruptions that come in our lives, knowing God ultimately has a plan. Tune in next week as we continue, and we'll unpack a little bit further the reflection in the midst of an explosion. Continue to make God proud in all you say, think, and do.